It's really great to be part of Turnberry's broker launch this year, a virtual launch. I can't wait for in-person events again. The vaccine will play a huge role in that, but more about that later. As we kick off, a quick question to you as our audience. How many of you floss on a regular basis? Spend a minute most days flossing. If you do, I have news for you. According to science, flossing has got little to no impact on preventing gum disease or cavities. So if you've been doing that religiously every day, you can stop. And if, like me, you haven't and you feel guilt about it, your guilt is alleviated. Don't you just love science, an old wives' tale? And there's plenty of that. How many of you are drinking 8 glasses of water a day? Why? There is zero science to back up that theory. Now science is saying drink to thirst and a little bit more on hot days. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I'm sure you've heard that. I'm sure you've used that on your kids. Turns out, no, afraid not. Those who are skipping breakfast now have better control over their weight than those who actually have breakfast, believe it or not. I know all the stuff that our parents told us could be wrong. Coffee, good or bad? I wonder. Well, as a coffee lover, I am so pleased to tell you that coffee is the elixir of the gods. It is good for you, so good for you, in fact. And this came out of a Harvard study over 10 years involving 20,000 participants. They showed that the more coffee you and I drink, the less chance we have of dying. Coffee is protective against certain cancers, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, even depression. And it's not the caffeine in coffee, it's the antioxidants that we absorb better than we absorb out of vegetables. So coffee, really, really good for you. And what's more, that same study went on to point out how many cups of coffee a day we should be drinking. I'm not sure how many you drink, but 6 is the recommended dosage. No white stuff, no milk, no sugar. 6 cups of black coffee is really good for you. And you do that, you will be living longer. Speaking of living longer, I want to introduce you to the, posthumously, the oldest documented person ever to have lived. Her name was Louise Colmar. She grew up in France in a place called Arles. She remembered the Eiffel Tower being erected. She remembered a mean old man coming to buy paint from her father, a man called Van Gogh. She rode a bike until the age of 100. She quit smoking at the age of 115, felt it was becoming a habit. And in August of 1997, she died at the age of 122. Oldest documented lady ever to have lived. 2 years before she passed away, at 120, they had a big celebration for her. And she spoke and she said some fascinating things. She said, at 120, I realized I have no peer pressure, which, thank you, Jean-Louise. She also had a lovely sense of humor. And she said, I've only got one wrinkle and I'm sitting on it. In that voice too. Now, some scientists looked at, or geneticists actually looked at Jean-Louise, and people have said to her, well, she's lived for so long and she smoked, and all these bad habits. It's just good genes, really, luck of the draw. But it turns out that's not the case. A famous Danish study done a couple of years ago on 2,500 identical twins showed that longevity was 20% genetics and 80% lifestyle. In other words, how you and I choose to live has a huge impact on how long we live, which is great news. So our DNA is not our destiny. Now, it was, unfortunately, DNA or genes that got my uncle. This is the man I get my name after, Uncle Michael. At the age of 23, he was a medical student driving back from the hospital one day, pulled his car off the side of the road, had an excruciating headache, which he'd had for a few days prior, and died. Turns out he had something called malignant hypertension, really, really high blood pressure, and suffered a stroke. Now, he had no idea there was anything wrong with him. At that point, he was otherwise healthy. And that struck me, that stayed with me. I was born a year later and took on his name. But the fact that just because you're not sick doesn't mean you're healthy. The absence of illness doesn't infer health. We need to be proactive about our health. It's not a default setting. The opposite of sickness isn't health. It's just not sick. In the same way that the opposite of unhappy is not happy. It's just not happy. We need to be proactive about our health in the same way we are proactive about being happy. I loved what Chris Barnard said. He said, I've saved the lives of 150 people through heart transplants. I could have saved 150 million through preventative medicine or being proactive about our health. So how can you and I be proactive about our health? I'm so glad you asked. There are essentially three things. Take off that post-it note in your fridge with the gym times and how many calories there are in orange juice or whatever you're drinking, and just write down three things: eat, sleep, and move. Eat, sleep, and move, the pillars of good health. Now, when it comes to eating, an apology from the medical fraternity because we have confused everybody. I was reading somewhere that people find it easier to complete their income tax returns than they do to figure out what's healthy to eat. And it is our fault. I mean, fat used to be bad. Now you've got to have 70% of fat in your diet. Really? I remember telling patients, watch how many eggs you consume. It could affect your blood cholesterol. Well, it turns out I was wrong, as was the American Heart Association. For 40 years, they had guidelines that said your dietary cholesterol impacts your serum cholesterol. Then in 2016, as recently as that, they turned around and said, oh, we were wrong, science has shown different. Your dietary cholesterol has got no impact on serum cholesterol, your blood cholesterol, so you can have as many eggs as you like. There is no correlation between egg intake and heart attacks. Isn't that great? You should be having plenty of eggs. Yolk included, so good for you. So eating, very confusing, and I'm sorry about that. The food pyramid, no science behind that either, just by the way. So what do we do? How should we eat? Very simply, and the best kind of mantra currently, which hasn't changed, is eat more real food, eat less junk food. Simple as that. If it goes ping on a microwave, if you need to drive through somewhere to pick it up, or if it comes in a box, avoid it. You know, if it walks, crawls, swims, flies, or grows, you can eat it. In fact, a good rule of thumb is if it comes from a plant, good. If it was made in a plant, not good. All right, that's eating. Sleeping. When it comes to sleeping, the big issue, gentlemen, is testicles. I said it. Yep. Men who sleep 5 hours or less have significantly smaller testicles than men who sleep 7 hours or more. It's true. And what's more, you have a testosterone profile of a man 10 years your senior if you're sleeping 5 hours or less. So please don't wear that as a badge of honor. I only need 5 hours because we know the truth now. But not only men. Ladies, this counts for you too. In fact, we do a global sleep experiment every year on 1.7 billion people across 67 countries, and it's called daylight saving. On the day that we lose an hour of sleep, we see an increase in heart attacks of 24%. And on the day that we increase and gain an hour of sleep, we see a decrease in heart attacks of 21% on that day only. And the same holds for motor vehicle accidents and suicides, in fact. Sleep is vitally important for you and I. 7 hours minimum. Do not get less than that. You'll see in a moment, I'll talk to how that impacts your immune system as well. And when you sleep, just think Batman. Cool, dark, quiet. All right? And then move. Exercise. We all know that exercise is that miracle drug. It's addictive. It's free. It helps maintain weight and prevents chronic disease and boosts immunity and sex drive and brain power and energy, and it affects good sleep. There's just so many good things that come alongside with move. And if you had to look at all those three and ask me which would you pin as the most important, I'm going to save till the end of the presentation to tell you that. Let's talk COVID just for a moment. I had the privilege of having an in-depth interview with Professor Glenda Gray last month, and we talked about a number of things. A cure potentially for COVID in early 2023. I suspect that might be a stretch and a miracle if that does happen. But mostly we talked about the vaccination and the fact that it's become an almost exclusive solution to protect the lives of those most at risk, as well as creating herd immunity. I've had my jab. I had the Johnson & Johnson jab, was part of the Sisonke healthcare workers trial. 470,000 high-risk healthcare workers got the jab. The most recent reports or preliminary findings of that study are that 99% of all of those healthcare workers are reporting no COVID. 1% reported the fact that they did get COVID, but 9 out of 10 of those cases were mild and not hospitalized. So the vaccine really is a no-brainer. 5 million lives. That's the number of lives that are saved every year through the smallpox vaccine alone. Last year, the year before that, and every other year, way back to the 18th century when it was first developed. And ever since then, vaccines have only gotten better and have had an impressive run of success. In many cases, controlling and completely eliminating dangerous and deadly diseases, measles, mumps, rubella, polio. That's all gone thanks to the vaccine. So why not the COVID vaccine? Well, great question. Why not? It really does save lives. I often get asked, which vaccine should I take? Of the two that are currently available in our country, Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, you take the vaccine that gets offered to you. Both vaccines way exceed the threshold efficacy set by regulating authorities. So take the vaccine that gets offered to you. What about some of these crazy myths? How could we develop a vaccine so quickly? Well, what so many people don't realize is that Oxford University researchers have been working on a vaccine to treat potential diseases should they come in future way before 2020. So by the time the COVID or COVID-19 came around, all the starting blocks were already in place and they just picked up where they were at and carried on. That's why we got together so quickly. It's the first time in history that scientists have not held their cards close to their chest and shared all the information they've had to come up with a vaccine so quickly. The fact that you can get COVID from the vaccine is complete fake news. You cannot get COVID or coronavirus disease from the vaccine. It is impossible to do. So if you get the chance, I urge you, get the jab, get the vaccine, not just for yourself, but for those around you, for your community, for your village. And while you wait, although it's September, so you should be over 18, you should be eligible to register and get that vaccine. What else can you do? Well, the vaccine essential. The other thing that you can do is make sure that your immune system is optimally functioning. And the way you do that, not ironically, but we've been talking about this, eat, sleep, and move. When it comes to eating, I get a lot of people saying, should I take vitamin C, extra zinc? The truth is, it could help if you're undernourished, but if you're having a whole food diet and you're eating properly, you don't need to supplement with vitamin C and zinc. When it comes to sleep, sleep boosts the effectiveness of specialized T lymphocytes, or T cells if you like. These are cells that recognize those foreign bodies and go and destroy any cells that have been contaminated with the virus. Very important cells in your body. If you're sleeping 7 hours or less, it has such an impact on your T cells that you're 3 times more likely to develop a cold, or in this case, 3 times more likely to develop COVID. 7 hours or less. Sleep, vitally important. And when it comes to exercise, a double whammy. We know that stress dampens the effect of your white blood cells, your leukocytes, those cells that are used to fight foreign invaders. So what stress does is dampen that response. Exercise dampens the stress response and naturally boosts your white blood cells, plus naturally boosts your overall immunity. So a double whammy when it comes to exercise. And of those 3 aspects and pillars of health, eat, sleep, and move has an immediate effect on your immunity. In fact, some amazing studies have come out very recently showing that, and in fact, it was a study that involved 50,000 participants, and they showed that those that were most fit as they got COVID, or the fittest people that got COVID, were the least likely to be hospitalized. But even more compelling was that of the top 3 comorbidities that came to effect for severe COVID, it was only age or advancing age and organ transplants that superseded an inactive lifestyle as the top 3 causes of comorbidities when it came to severe COVID. So exercise, moving more, vitally important when it comes to dealing with this pandemic that we're in right now. Now, there's not much good to say about COVID, but the pandemic did trigger massive disruption in the healthcare industry for the better, with the #1 digital health trend being, ta-da, telemedicine. In the US, for example, telemedicine or telehealth increased by 38 times from the pre-COVID-19 baseline, driven mainly by increased consumer and provider willingness to use telehealth. Similar trends were seen in South Africa. Patients that used virtual consultation services also experienced high rates of satisfaction with the service, with one customer satisfaction survey from September 2020 showing that 86% of patients who responded to the survey reported being very satisfied with their virtual consultation. The proof really is in the pudding. According to the World Economic Forum, over 60% of healthcare leaders are now investing heavily in digital health technology. Investment has in turn fueled innovation, with 3 times the level of venture capital investment in digital health in 2020 compared to the year before. And it's not a fad. Even as COVID-19 vaccines roll out globally, telehealth looks set to stay. McKinsey estimates that $250 billion of the total US healthcare spend will go virtual in the years after the pandemic, with an estimated 40%, 4 out of 10 primary care appointments being conducted remotely. Telemedicine not only gained momentum during the pandemic, but it's predicted to change the future of medicine forever, and not just change it, but disrupt it. Now, disruption in healthcare is born out of something that radically changes the way medical practice operates, and it happens when someone intentionally targets the overlooked corners of the healthcare industry by offering a new service or product that is more affordable, more efficient, and improves patient experience. The healthcare system used to be supply-driven, rotating around the doctor. That old phrase, "the doctor will see you now," that usually came after a painfully long wait in a waiting room. Yes, we actually called it that, littered with outdated huisgenots and sick people that increased your risk of getting sicker than you were when you first arrived. That process was rinsed and repeated for your follow-up visit for that second round of antibiotics. But that's rapidly changing. To the patient will see you now. You see, telemedicine is turning the age-old system on its head, making it demand-driven and patient-driven or patient-centric, when a patient can choose the form of care they want and access it anytime, anywhere. That is the promise we built Hello Doctor on. You can speak to a doctor anytime, anywhere, in any language, almost immediately. It's a promise we've held true to for over a decade now. That's how long we've been at it as pioneers of telemedicine in South Africa. Telemedicine is also changing the concept of primary healthcare, particularly among digital natives. That's the generation that grew up with mobile devices, who cannot conceive of a world without Wi-Fi, who feel like their umbilical cord has been ripped out when there's no connectivity. For them, primary healthcare is not seeing a GP or going to the clinic, but rather going online and asking Dr. Google. That's their first port of call, the new version of primary healthcare. The upside of that is that patients are taking more responsibility for their own health and doing it sooner. The rise of mobile healthcare has brought with it a shift in patient behavior, if you like. Patients have moved away from being passive stakeholders to becoming proactive drivers of their own health, and that's good. The downside is the inability for the average user to distinguish between fact or fiction. Google knows a lot, but it doesn't know you, your family history, your living circumstances, or your community, which is why access to a real doctor is still essential. And it's also why AI will never completely replace a doctor's visit. AI, together with human intervention, will be our best solution in healthcare in future. AI brings knowledge to the consult. A doctor brings wisdom. And there's an important difference. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to use that fruit in a fruit salad. So let's park AI for a moment and digital health and health equity, and let's get back to exercise and movement as that double whammy when it comes to bolstering our immunity as a way of protecting us against COVID. Now, a lot of us have got a lot of knowledge around exercise, how and what, but not a lot of wisdom in terms of why we should be exercising. And I want to dive into that for the last bit of this particular presentation. Quickly, some of the how and the what. So when it comes to exercise, how much? 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise every week are the global guidelines for good health. That's a half an hour a day, 5 days a week. That's all. If you don't have time for that, really, you can do 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise every week. That's how much? So 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous. What's the difference? Well, you've got to listen to your heart. Put your rock set on and see how intensely your heart reacts to your exercise. If you've got a heart rate monitor, easy to work that out. If you don't, the talk test is what I generally go to. If you can sing while you're exercising, you're not exercising. If you can talk while you're exercising but not sing, that's moderate intensity. And if you can't talk while you're exercising, a few words between breaths, that's vigorous intensity. So that's how much, that's how hard. What about the best kind of exercise? I know there's some CrossFitters in the room, particularly Turnberry consultants, and you're going to say, yeah, CrossFit. The answer is no. But neither is it running, neither is it swimming. The best exercise in terms of the nature of exercise in the world is, drumroll please, the one that you will do. Now, I know that's a lame response, but it's a true one, and it's based on science, because science has shown that there's not one exercise that has benefit over another as long as you do it at the right intensity for your level of fitness, which is great. It means anything goes, any kind of movement. I can't run, I've got a bad knee, so I cycle. If you can't run or cycle, you could swim. If you can't do those three, you could dance, or you could even garden, if you can garden at the right intensity. The world really opens up when it comes to movement. Over and above your 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise every week, you need to do 2 sessions a week of strength training or resistance exercises. Why? Well, if you're an inactive adult, what happens to your body is you tend to get a loss of muscle mass, all right? And that happens from the age of 30 onwards. You're losing up to 10% of your muscle mass every decade if you're inactive. A loss of muscle mass, you get a decrease in metabolic rate, the rate at which you burn fuel, and you get an increase in fat accumulation. Now, the only kind of exercise that combats those horrible effects of being inactive or sedentary is strength training, not cardiovascular training. So with strength training, you get an increase in muscle mass, you get an increase in metabolic rate, and a decrease in fat accumulation. 2 sessions a week. You need to do strength training. Let's get on to the why. So why? What's your why to exercise? A little while ago, a gentleman came up to me and said, Dr. Moll, I just wanted to introduce myself to you and tell you that I've lost 53 kilograms, yes, in the last 8 months. And I said to him, that's amazing. I know how you did that, but why? I'm interested in the why. And it was a fascinating story. It was semi-fascinating. I mean, the guy's a Man United fan. That spoiled the story for me from the get-go. But, you know, for honesty's sake, let me tell you exactly what the story was. A Man United fan who was morbidly obese, but a huge fan, so much so that he bought the kit every year. Only he needed a triple XL kit, and South Africa doesn't have triple XL kits. They only bring in double XL. So he had to order his kit from the UK, which meant import duty, pound-rand exchange. There was delivery costs. I mean, it just became exorbitant. And so this year, he said, I decided to just buy a double XL. He said, I put the kit on, I looked in the mirror, and I was so ashamed to be a Man United supporter that looked like that I said, no more. And he said, 8 months later, I've lost 53 kilograms. I now wear an XL, locally bought Man United kit. Amazing. I mean, the fact that he's a Man United fan, just look past that, says a Liverpool fan. But can you see what his why was? It was compelling. Without a why, you're not going to carry on exercising. Smoothies, coffees, points, those are nudges. They're not deep-seated motivation. You and I need a why to exercise on a regular basis. This is my why growing up. This is the governor of California, a poster of Arnie on my wall. I've since replaced that poster with this picture. Now, don't laugh and snigger. This is not a before or after. This is a what could be. And I say what could be because I did my DNA analysis a good couple of years ago already. Did it twice because I didn't like the result. But the result came back and said this: we've identified a variation in your gene profile that indicates that weight loss may be difficult and you might gain weight easily. Really? Mom and Dad, you gave me the obesity gene, the FTO allele. Yes, of all the things that you could have handed down, the pointy nose, the big forehead, the small ears, you give me the obesity gene. And I remember reading that result and feeling so deflated and kind of disheartened, I plopped on the couch, opened a bag of chips and just started stuffing my face. Bring it on. This is my destiny. But it turns out that our DNA is not our destiny. It turns out that with regular exercise, daily activity, I can turn off that bad gene. I can blunt the effect of the bad gene. And so my why, ladies and gentlemen, is not a carrot or some noble attempt or pursuit. It's simply a little gene that hangs over my head at 5:30 every morning when my alarm goes off to exercise, saying, I'm gonna get you if you don't get up and exercise. What a horrible why. But it's a compelling one. And the question is, what's your why to exercise? Have you got one? Because if you don't, everything you tried up to now is going to be a half-baked attempt. What is your why? Let's look at some potential medical reasons why you could have a why. I'm going to go through a couple very quickly. The first is I want you to measure your resting heart rate. Okay, once again, if you've got a watch or a Fitbit or something that does it for you, great. If you don't, just find your pulse and you find it below your wrist. And I'm going to send off a beep, or you're going to hear a beep. And then I want you to start counting. When you hear a second beep, that'll be 15 seconds later. Stop counting and you multiply your score by 4. Sounds very confusing. It's really just to get your resting heart rate. Okay? Are you ready? Can you feel your pulse? Start counting on the count of 3. 3, 2, 1. Beep. All right, 15 seconds. And then I'll tell you what's significant about your resting heart rate. Best time to do this? Just before you get out of bed in the mornings. And there's that beep. Okay, take your score, multiply it by 4. That's your resting heart rate. What's significant about your resting heart rate? Well, your heart has to pump 5 liters of blood right around your body every single minute. An efficient heart, a healthy heart, is going to do that in around 55 beats per minute. An inefficient heart in around 85 beats per minute. Really? Why the specifics? Well, if you go to your GP today and he or she measures your heart rate and it's under 100, you're going to get well, that's fine. I'm telling you, it's not fine. There's a massive difference between 85 beats per minute and 55 beats per minute. Well, there's a 30 beats per minute difference. 30 unnecessary extra heartbeats. Less chance for your heart to recover. Your heart's working harder. It's not going to last as long. Every day, every hour, it's an extra 1,800 heartbeats, extra unnecessary heartbeats. Every day, 43,000 extra unnecessary heartbeats. I'm losing track of my maths. I think every year it's 15 million extra unnecessary heartbeats. Over a 40-year period, you're looking at 600 million unnecessary heartbeats. God gives us on average 2.5 billion heartbeats in our lifetime. That's a big chunk of heartbeats that you miss out on or have a shortened life expectancy because your heart rate is too high. There's a lovely illustration in nature. The hummingbird has an average heart rate of 350 beats per minute and lives for about 3.5 years. Whereas the turtle has an average heart rate of 7 beats per minute and lives, if you've ever watched Finding Nemo, around 150 years. The interesting fact is that both the hummingbird and the turtle have on average the same number of heartbeats in their lifetime. Only the hummingbird lives for 3.5 years and the turtle 150. It's the same for you and I. We want to slow down our heart rate. How do we do that? Guys, move more. Exercise. Your heart is a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger and more efficient it becomes. Okay? First test, resting heart rate. Next test I'd like you to do is actually to get up and measure your risk for a heart attack or stroke. Right here, right now. The way you do that is you stand up, put your feet together, heels together, straight legs, bend over and touch your toes. All right? Do that now. I'll give you a split second just to physically do that wherever you are watching this launch from. And again, thank you, Turnberry, for giving us an opportunity to test our risk for heart attacks and strokes. What have we just tested? Well, this study came from a report or a study in the American Journal of Physiology some years ago, where they drew a correlation between your ability to stretch beyond your toes and arterial stiffness. The stiffer you were, the stiffer your arteries were. And arterial stiffness is a precursor to heart disease. All right? Think about an old hosepipe that's been in the sun for many, many years. A young, healthy artery is flexible and can manage all sorts of pressure changes. But as it gets older, it gets stiffer. And all of a sudden, blood pressure increases, flow increases, and you start to get fine little micro tears on the inside, the lining of your artery. We call it the lumen. On the inside luminal part of the artery, you get tears, and those tears heal very quickly, but they heal with little micro scars, and over time those scars create almost like a corduroy effect on the inside of your artery, and to that rough surface you get fatty deposits and cells depositing, and all of a sudden that narrowing eventually becomes a blockage, and that is your heart attack or brain attack, a stroke, and it starts with arterial stiffness. So what can you and I do to prevent arterial stiffness? Great question. I'm so glad you asked. Exercise. Exercise delays the onset of arterial stiffness. All right, it doesn't reverse it. So the time to start exercising is not when I get out of shape or Monday or next week or next month. No, it's this afternoon. It's today. So vitally important for South Africans. Why? Because did you know that South Africa as a country has the highest incidence of high blood pressure in people over the age of 50? At any time in history for any country in the world, that's us. Is that a problem? It's a huge problem. Why? Because high blood pressure is a silent killer. It has no symptoms. You do not know that you have it. Just because you're not sick doesn't mean you're healthy. You could have a high blood pressure and not be aware of it. All right. Am I scaring you? That's the point. Okay. What can we do about that? How do we stop that? And by the way, when it comes to symptoms, often the first symptom of high blood pressure in 50% of cases is a heart attack. And a third of those are fatal. So you don't want to be that guy or that girl. So what can we do? How do we combat high blood pressure? Yes, you guessed it. Exercise. Exercise. Move more. The more you and I move, the less blood pressure problems we have. In fact, unlike arterial stiffness, exercise can reverse high blood pressure. So if you have high blood pressure, you can exercise yourself out of having high blood pressure. Do it along with your GP. Don't stop your medication straight away, but you certainly can reduce it to a point where you don't need it anymore, just through exercise alone. You can reverse high blood pressure, which is amazing. And that's not just hearsay or good idea. That's fact. In fact, it came out of a study that Harvard and Stanford got together on over 350,000 participants, a meta-analysis that looked at drugs and exercise when it came to managing the outcomes of high blood pressure and pre-diabetes and myocardial infarcts, and they found no that's so hard to say, no statistical difference between exercise and drugs when it came to managing high blood pressure, which is amazing. In fact, out of that study, they coined the phrase, exercise is medicine, because it is. So that's high blood pressure. Let me touch on diabetes for a moment. Significant condition. You and I need to be afraid of diabetes. It is coming down on this country and the world, if you like a pandemic out of nowhere. All right. What happens when we eat is the food that we ingest gets absorbed as glucose into our bloodstreams, and then insulin secreted by our pancreas is the key that unlocks that glucose, gets the glucose absorbed out of our blood and into our cells where we can use it for life and energy. That's the natural process. If you are a diabetic, if you've developed type 2 diabetes, you either have no insulin or your cells are not sensitive to insulin, and you therefore cannot get glucose or sugar out of your blood into your cells. Is that a problem? It's a huge problem. In fact, it's so big that I'd love you to do this illustration with your kids if you've got them, or your nephews and nieces, or just anyone interested that wants to have a life lesson. Gather them around, roll up your sleeve, and get yourself a coarse grey piece of sandpaper, get some towels, you'll see why in a moment, get everyone's attention and start to rub the inside of your forearm with sandpaper, and rub it really hard until it starts to bleed. Yes! All right. At that point, stop, blow, let it dry. Wait for it to dry, start again. Now you start to see a lot more blood and serum, and you're getting welts coming up. It's messy, hence the towels. Stop, blow, dry, carry on. At this point, the kids that have gathered around you will be freaking out, eyes this big. That's when you say, kids, this is what sugar does to the inside of your arteries. Because it does. That's why diabetics are losing their eyesight, losing their kidneys, losing their limbs. It's a vascular disease, and it is terrifying. People often say to me, have you got diabetes? And my answer is, not yet. We need to fight this. Are you guys at risk for diabetes? You want to know that. You surely do. You can't measure, pinch, feel anything on your body, but there is an assessment you can do. I'm going to whip it up onto your screens right now. 6 questions. Answer those questions. Add up your scores as you go along. Here we go. How old are you? If you're under 40, no points, which is a good thing. 40 to 49, 1. 50 to 59, 2 points. 60 or older, 3 points. All right, so I'm already on 2 points. Not great. Woman or a man? If you're a woman, no points. Good. Man, 1 point automatically. I'm on 3. Not great. Does a family member have diabetes? No or yes. 1 point. Next 3 questions. Do you have high blood pressure? If you don't, no points. If you do, give yourself a point. Are you overweight or obese? 0 for normal weight, 1 for overweight, 2 for obese, 3 for extremely obese. And finally, are you physically active? If you're not, no points. If you are, 150 minutes, moderate intensity every week, then subtract a point. Okay, now you should have a score that's unique to you. What does that score mean? If you scored 4, you're at risk for something called pre-diabetes, which means you're pretty much on your way to getting and developing type 2 diabetes. The good news is you can turn around and run in the opposite direction, which you should. All right. If you scored 5 or more, you're at risk of full-blown diabetes. You might already have diabetes. It is reversible at, I was going to say, great expense, great cost, great lifestyle cost, but it's not the end of the world. I would suggest if that's you, get your fasting blood sugar as soon as possible because you need to know those numbers. All right. If you're at risk, as most of us are, what can we do? I know. Would you believe? Exercise. Yes. Here's one of God's great ones. When I read this, it was phenomenal. Did you know that when we exercise, our body is able to absorb sugar out of our bloodstreams independently of insulin? And what's more, when we exercise, our cells are super sensitized to insulin, which means it protects our pancreas and delays the onset of diabetes. I mean, that is just phenomenal. And that effect lasts for 24 hours after every little bit of exercise you and I do. That alone should be reason enough. That should be everybody's why to exercise. What a great God-given hack. Okay, that's my why. Why number 2. I'm almost done. This is a condition that the World Health Organization describes as robbing more adults of more productive years of their life than any other condition. It's not dandruff, clearly. It is anxiety and depression. In South Africa, 1 in 6 people are currently battling with a mental health condition. And depression is in the top of that list. It could be you. Are you at risk? Well, this was a study done by some New Zealand scientists way back in the early 90s, where they discovered just 2 questions could accurately predict, within around 90% accuracy, individuals who are at risk for depression and anxiety. And these are the 2 questions. Have you, during the past month, often been bothered by feeling down, depressed, or hopeless? Question number 1. Question number 2, during the past month, have you often been bothered by little interest or pleasure in doing things? If that's you, you may well be at risk for depression. And let me tell you, you're not alone. The stigma around depression, I do not understand. I mean, even the way we use the term. If you had an infected appendix, what do you say? I have appendicitis or I am appendicitis? You say, I have appendicitis. And yet when we're battling with depression, what do we say? I have depression or I am depressed. We let the disease define us. It's a disease that you're managing. You have depression. If that is you, if you are at risk, there is something you can do, but the most important thing you need to do is tell someone who cares and someone who can help. But what about exercise? So far, everything else has been exercise, and exercise counts here too. It absolutely does. You might have heard of the phrase, not the phrase, but happy hormones, those endorphins, those natural highs that we get from exercise, the runner's high. Thankfully, not just for runners, otherwise I would be disqualified, but any kind of exercise. In fact, the more intensely you work out, the more endorphins you actually produce. Wonderful neurochemicals that are painkillers and make you feel good, and that's the addictive part of exercise. But the question is, how effective are endorphins when it comes to managing depression? And the answer is very effective. A study comparing Prozac, not a drug class, Prozac to exercise, showed again no statistical difference between exercise and Prozac when it came to managing mild to moderate depression. Guys, that is so significant. And it had the same treatment profiles, took 4 to 6 weeks to really kick in. So if that's you, seriously consider exercise as a big why to manage your depression. Right, I'm probably annoyed the life out of you with exercise. So here's the last slide for you. And it's something that you and I do on a regular basis, daily, for which exercise is no benefit and no savior. All right, what is that? Sitting. You and I sit too much. A couple of studies have now come out to show that people who sit for extended periods of time have a 200% increased risk for shortened life expectancy than those who stand up and move around more often. 90 minutes was the kind of cutoff time. Can you believe that? In fact, there was a study recently that where they coined the phrase sitting is the new smoking. You might have heard of that. It came from a study that showed for every cigarette you and I smoke, we shorten life expectancy by around 11 minutes. But for every hour we sit, we shorten life expectancy by 22 minutes. I kid you not, it's almost healthier to go outside and have a regular smoke break than it is to sit for extended periods of time. All right? The clanger for me was even if you're getting your activity guidelines, even if you're hitting 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise every week, if you sit for extended periods of time, your risk profile doesn't change. It's still exactly the same as someone who exercises compared to someone who doesn't. It's a bit like smoking when you exercise. Smoking is bad for you either which way. The same goes for sitting. We call you active couch potatoes, meeting your exercise guidelines but sitting for extended periods of time. Don't. The American Heart Association says sit less, move more. Not particularly helpful. I'd suggest that for every hour you sit, you have a little alarm that goes off to remind you to get up and move around. There are apps that do that. Watches do that. You know, just some little buzzer reminder. Get up and make a phone call. Pick a fight with someone. Just yell at somebody. Do jumping jacks, but do something to break that hour behind your desk. And that's the only way you combat the dangers of sitting, something exercise can't help you for. So guys, that's it. I'm done. I've rushed through this. I do apologize. Turnberry only gave me 30 minutes. No, I'm kidding you guys. I know you've got a full launch schedule. But just to say this, when it comes to your health, in fact, those of you who've read your Bible, you would know this verse, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest is love. When it comes to your health, it's eat, sleep, and move, and the greatest is move. When it comes to move, what you do really doesn't matter. How you do it matters only with regards to intensity. Why you do it makes all the difference in the world. And I hope that today, post Turnberry's broker launch, you will go home and figure out what your why is, because it's life-changing.